Israel is standing up to international pressure over banning the United Nations Works and Relief Agency. UN Ambassador Danny Danon says UNRWA in Gaza is a front for Hamas.
Well, on the northern border, Israel reports that it has greatly reduced Hezbollah's arsenal of weapons. CBN Middle East correspondent Julie Stahl has more.
Israel's defense minister says Hezbollah's rocket supply has been reduced by 80%. Experts estimate that's down to 10,000 from 50,000. Still, the Iranian proxy continues to launch UAVs daily into Israel. Meanwhile, Hezbollah's new leader, Sheikh Naim Qassem, is hiding out in Iran, hoping to avoid the fate of his predecessors who were killed in Israeli airstrikes. As Iran threatens to respond to Israel's retaliatory strike on the Islamic regime this past weekend, the IDF's top general warns against it.
If Iran makes the mistake of launching another missile barrage at Israel, we will once again know how to reach Iran with capabilities that we did not even use this time, and strike very, very hard at both our capabilities and locations that we set aside for now.
In northern Gaza this week, the IDF announced it surrounded hundreds of Hamas terrorists who surrendered on the spot. On the international front, Israel is facing harsh criticism for its new laws banning UNRWA from operating in areas under its control.
It poses risks for millions of Palestinians who rely on UNRWA for essential services, including health care and primary and secondary education.
Norway says it will ask the United Nations to get the International Court of Justice to weigh in. The Palestinian representative to the UN says many of his people in Gaza are doomed without UNRWA feeding and caring for them.
Hundreds of thousands of Palestinians are at risk of imminent death.
As we see it, there is no alternative to UNRWA.
But Knesset members say Israel has proven some UNRWA staff are members of Hamas and took part in the October 7th attack on Israel.
In all the actions that we know that the Hamas organization did in the state of Israel, UNRWA were an active part of it.
UNRWA Gaza has become a front for Hamas.
As to claims that only UNRWA can provide sufficient aid to Palestinians,
other people can do it and will do it beautifully without being terrorists.
Julie Stahl, CBN News, Jerusalem.
The hypocrisy at the UN is truly astounding. They had this whitewash report after it was shown clearly by Israel that members of the staff of UNRWA, who were being paid salaries by UNRWA, physically were there October 7th, were part of the terror attack from Hamas on the Gaza envelope in Israel. And in that, they came through and said, well, it's just a few bad apples. And then you have one of the leaders of Hamas being killed in Lebanon, not in Gaza, but in Lebanon. And it comes out he's on salary. He's been on salary for a very long time with UNRWA. For UNRWA to now say, well, we didn't know about this. Well, what in the world were you thinking was going on in your basement? Hamas was using the basement of the UNRWA structures to have command and control over the terrorists. They built these tunnels and all of this infrastructure. What do you think was happening in UNRWA schools where whole floors were being given over to Hamas, as if somehow that was hidden from you? It was in plain sight. And UNRWA clearly was part of Hamas. And all of the humanitarian aid, instead of going to the people of Gaza, went into buying rockets and building terror machines. All of this is now plainly evident to the entire world. And so to hear from the UN, to hear from the EU, to hear from our own State Department that they don't see an alternative to UNRWA, there has to be. It's been completely infiltrated by this ideology, by Hamas, and within those schools, they are training the next generation of Palestinians to hate Jews and to think that somehow it's virtuous to go and kill them and wipe Israel off the map. If we want long-lasting peace in the Middle East, you have to train the next generation. That ideology is wrong. You can't support peace with that kind of ideology going on generations. UNRWA is unique in the world. There is another refugee organization within the UN that isn't dedicated to this ideology. UNRWA has now 5 generations of Palestinian refugees. At what point do you say, well, they're not really refugees anymore? At what point do you say you aren't going to wipe Israel off the map? The UN has recognized Israel's right to exist. Well, why aren't you recognizing that as well? It's high time, and I remind everyone, under the Trump administration, all U.S. funding to UNRWA was eliminated. It was quite evident, based on the intelligence that they had in 2016 to 2020, that funding UNRWA was just funding terrorism. One of the first things that Joe Biden did in the first week of his presidency was to restore that funding. And in that, we get October 7th. Let's remember that, and remember we should not be funding terrorism.